Oklahoma has produced many great writers, but none better than Caroline Henderson. Throughout her life, Caroline wrote about her own life, the life around her. The sense of community was there. She was both poignant, she was poetic. Her words are used to create this image, this emotion of living through the Dust Bowl. Well, Caroline lived from the time when times were good to when times were a struggle. When times were good, we had this magical moment when the price of commodities were going up after 1898. The rains returned to the southern plains, and so conditions were good farther out on the plains when farm equipment is being mechanized with the internal combustion engine. And with greater production capabilities, better weather, with this rich topsoil, settlers start moving out onto the high plains that have been nothing but an ocean of grass for millions of years. And suddenly they're plowing up the sod and planting wheat. The prices are good enough to support it. The tractors are there to create production. And these families, like Caroline's family, moved out onto the high plains when times were good. Then comes the perfect storm. Not only is there an environmental disaster, the rains stop, the winds howl, the dust starts flying, crops fail in the fields. But you also get a crash of commodity prices after World War I that gets even worse in the 1930s with the Great Depression. And so Caroline captured this time period, one person's emotional reaction to these hard times, but at the same time, this spirit of survival, of perseverance, the challenges, the opportunities that everyone faces in life. But at this one moment on the high plains, during this perfect storm of an environmental and economic disaster, this one woman was there as an eyewitness. Forever we will have that legacy of her writing. In addition to the poetic words of Caroline Henderson, who captured the spirit of these hard times, a large collection of photographs have been assembled that document this history. Not only were we able to go back into the field to find the ghost homes where people had lived and the homes that are abandoned on the Great Plains, but we could go back in time and find photographs, not just of the struggle, but the way things were when times were good. Primarily, we have the Farm Security Administration photographs taken from 1935 to 1944, where the federal government was providing the funding to employ out-of-work artists such as Dorothea Lange, sending them out into the communities around America to capture the spirit of America at that moment in time. So we have the photographs of the homes, of the dust, of the families, of this sense of struggle, this sense of perseverance. Her words capture the spirit and the agony of it, but also the hope, the perseverance that defines the Oklahoma spirit that comes through strongly in her words.
Who has given me this sweet and given my brother dust to eat? For we are in the worst of this dust storm area, where William Vaughn Moody's expression, dust to eat, is not a mere figure of speech as he intended, but a phrasing of bitter reality, becomes more serious with each passing day.
Caroline Henderson's life just does not fit what one expects for a woman 120 years ago, and certainly not for the Great Plains of Oklahoma. Yet she took her college degree, a degree at that time which most public school teachers did not have, and took that degree to the panhandle of Oklahoma in order to farm, because she loved the land and hoped to make her life there. She loved that land but it did not love her. She faced recurring droughts, including the dust storms of the 1930s. She responded to those changes at two different times in her life by writing to add income for the family. First, in 1914, she developed a column for Ladies' World magazine, The Homestead Lady, which endured from 1914 until 1918 and the demise of that publication. Thereafter, farming conditions, the general climate, and so forth changed on the Great Plains. We faced a national economic collapse, the Great Depression, farm prices collapsed, and she began looking for other alternative income. She and her daughter had gone to the University of Kansas, where her daughter Eleanor eventually completed a medical degree, one of the first women to do so, and Caroline completed a master's degree in literature, primarily for her own purposes. Her writing from that period of time and for some of those college classrooms was eventually published in Atlantic Monthly. And in the next few years, her writing about the farm conditions on the Great Plains and the dust storms set a gold standard for regional writing about the Great Plains. She is still the most quoted author describing the Dust Bowl. She is still referred to for descriptions of the Great Plains. But Caroline had not set out to be a writer, even one noted for her literary qualities. Her dream had been to find fulfillment on the land she loved. What she found instead was dust to eat.
April 28, 1908. My dear little Rose, after surviving a bout with diphtheria, the thought of returning to the old routine seemed intolerable. So, here I am, away out on that narrow strip of Oklahoma between Kansas and the Texas Panhandle, holding down one of the prettiest claims in the Beaver County Strip. Oh, I wish you could see this wide, free western country with its great stretches of almost level prairie covered with short, thick buffalo grass. The marvelous glory of its sunrises and sunsets. The brilliancy of its starlit night. August 17th, 1908. The day I married Will Henderson, May 7th, was one of the most perfect days I have ever seen. We made the long 30-mile drive to Guyman the preceding day in a prairie schooner in real Western style. It was toward evening before we got away, but I shall always be glad it was just as it was. For the memory of that perfect night of moonlight and starlight, when we seemed to have the world to ourselves, is a treasure that I shall carry with me my entire life, and I believe through all eternity. August 1909. Through June, there was plenty of rain. Everything grew wonderfully. All of our crops promised an abundant return for our labor. One of our particular pleasures at the time was our Sunday morning walks through the field, where we noticed the growth of all of our new plantings. Our hearts full of thankfulness for the hope of it and for everything. And now, there's nothing left, except the invisible blessings I spoke of. During the latter part of June and all of July and August so far, there has been no rain. The heat has been the most intense I have ever experienced. Scorching, withering blasts, which seem to come from a furnace 7 times heated. "1915. You asked about gray hairs. You might have asked more precisely, do I have any brown ones left? And I might have answered, yes, a few. It has been a full year for us, with more of encouragement for the future.
Indeed, when Mother was here in September and rather lamented the hardships that possibly we shall always have, I tried to convince her that, according to statistics, we probably have something near our share of the world's wealth already. She said, well, the Lord pity the rest of them then.
Ladies' World, 1916. Each year I struggle to have a flower garden, dig the earth and carry water, shade the tiny plants, and screen them from hoppers and blister beetles. I resolve that next year I will be sensible and save the hard work. But the next year I do it all again. For later on, when the pretty flowers and the fragrance of the petunias meet us away down the road as we're bringing in the cows, I realize that nothing I have done has paid any better. "1916. A mother recently said, we hope to give our children an education. It is all we shall be able to do for them. I knew what she meant and sympathized with the motive. Yet sometimes we speak and feel too much that an education were a finished product, to be bought and paid for, often at great sacrifice, and bestowed. In reality, education can only be attained by personal effort, and should be for each a continuing process, ending only with life itself, or possibly then just well begun. We have seen no soldier and few flags but our own. We have heard no bugle calls, no band playing the Star-Spangled Banner, nor even a congregation singing America or the noble battle hymn of the Republic. Our gardening, canning, and Red Cross work have, of necessity, been done alone, yet wonderfully. We have been made to feel, even in our remoteness, and millions like us, that we have a part in the great work for liberty.
Caroline accompanied her daughter to the University of Kansas in 1930, where she went on to earn a master's degree in literature. In that conjunction with her writing for those classes, she wrote a number of pieces that were recommended for publication. The first of those was published in Atlantic Monthly in 1931, entitled Bringing in the Sheaves.
In all this great southwestern plains country, the pale gold of ripening wheat has day by day been changing to the duller brown of cut-over stubble. Early and late from all directions has resounded the hum of tractors and combines. Toward nightfall, in the sunset glow, the air has been luminous with the incandescent dust rising in clouds among each moving combine. I have never seen a more beautiful harvest. Each day passed, full of effort, each one adding to our accumulating weariness. Even though we took full advantage of each diversion, we enjoyed to the full the beauty of the pink bush morning glories, which grew here and there among the wheat, appreciated the pungent odor as we cut through the occasional wild mountain sage, loved the little rabbits as they hopped off to safety. When the last day came, I was relieved to see the tractor girl had enough excess energy left to turn a few handsprings in celebration of the event. The man shoveled his last load into the loft, and I brought a broom to sweep up what was left for chicken feed. It certainly seemed that something attempted, something done, would earn us a night's repose. Yet repose was the last thing any of us gained from one of the best wheat harvests this country has ever seen in the 24 years of our farming, and that includes the early homesteading days. Bewilderment, distraction, despair would come nearer to suggesting the common state of mind when people are forced to sell their most important livelihood for less than the cost of production. Atlantic Monthly, August 1933. Last week, I caught a glimpse of what must have been the real bluebird of happiness. A flash of the deepest azure brightening up the misty morning upon which it appeared in the branches of our locust tree. We were more than glad to welcome this messenger of spring, for our winter of discontent had been long and stormy and persistent. Even last week, when we should have been making May baskets, the lilac blossoms, which had survived the March blizzards and the April gales, and the rosebuds, just beginning to show their color, were coated with ice and tinkled in the shifting winds. Out here, we thought the depths of the depression had been fathomed when the sheriff subtracted from one of our neighbor's most personal possessions a pair of false teeth he was unable to pay for. But we were too sanguine. For the next week, a terrible cloud came rolling up from the south, and the little chicks were almost immediately beaten to the earth by the vicious pelting of hail that burst from that ugly-looking cloud. It was then that I realized that our garden and truck patch and wheat fields were all involved in one common ruin. What to do? We hardly know. But as the saying goes, we have the bear by the tail, and now looks like a poor time to let go. Of all of our losses in the recent years, the most distressing has been our loss of self-respect. July 26, 1935. To Henry A. Wallace, Secretary of Agriculture. Who has given me this sweet and given my brother dust to eat? And when will his wage come in? For 27 years, this small spot on the vast expanses of the Great Plains has been the center of all our hope and thought and effort. And marvelous are the changes we have seen and in which we have participated. The almost unbroken buffalo grass has given way to cultivated fields. The small, crude huts and dugouts of the early days have been replaced by moderately comfortable homes. The old trails have become wide graded highways. Railways have been built, reducing our journey to market from 30 miles to 15 and later to 2.5.
Little towns have sprung up with attractive homes, trees, flowers, schools, churches, and hospitals. Automobiles and trucks, tractors and combines have revolutionized methods of farm work and manner of living. The wonderful crop of 1926, when our country alone produced 10 million bushels of wheat, more, it was said, than any other equal area in the world, revealed the possibilities of our productive soil under modern methods of farming. I can shut my eyes and feel yet the rush of an almost painful thankfulness when we looked out over our fields that summer and watched our ripening grain bending, rising, bending again in golden waves swept on interminably in the restless wind. It seemed as if at last our dreams were coming true.
Yet now, our daily physical torture, confusion of mind, and gradual wearing down of courage makes that long-continued hope seem like a vanishing dream. For we are in the worst of this dust storm area, where William Vaughn Moody's expression, "dust to eat," is not a mere figure of speech as he intended, but a phrasing of bitter reality. It becomes more serious with each passing day.
Any attempt to suggest the violent discomfort of these storms is likely to be vain, except to those who have already experienced them.
There are days when for hours at a time we cannot see the windmill 50 feet from our kitchen door. There are days when for briefer periods one cannot distinguish the wall from the windows because of the solid blackness of the raging storms. Only in some inferno-like dream could one visualize the terrifying, lurid red light overspreading the sky as portions of Texas are on the air. This wind-driven dust, finer than the finest flour, penetrates anywhere air goes. At the little country store in our neighborhood, after one of the worst of these storms, all the candy in the showcases looked alike and equally brown. Dust to eat, and dust to breathe, and dust to drink. Dust in our beds, dust in the flour bins, on dishes and walls and windows, dust in our hair, the eyes and ears and throat and teeth, to say nothing of the heaped up accumulation on the floors and windowsills after one of the bad days.
In 1931, we raised a good crop of wheat and sufficient forage for our stock. But the ruinous prices left little or nothing in return for our labors. Since 1931, the record has been one of practically unbroken drought. Now we are facing our 4th year of failure. Pastures have changed to barren wastes, and dooryards around humble little homes have become scenes of dusty desolation.
June 30th, 1935. My dear Evelyn, wearing our shade hats with handkerchiefs tied across our faces, and Vaseline in our nostrils. We have tried to rescue our home from the accumulations of wind-blown dust. I keep oiled cloth on the windowsill and between the upper and lower sashes. It helps just a little to retard and collect the dust. Some seal the windows with gum-backed strips of paper used in wrapping parcels, but no method is truly effective. Contrary to many published reports, a good many people have left this country before the rains came. Not merely the drifters that are frequently alleged. A Kansas friend of mine sent me a list of who had already left their immediate neighborhood. The list included 109 persons in 26 families, many of whom had been there in that locality for over 10 years, as many as 40 years for some. In those families, there had been 2 deaths from dust pneumonia. Others in the neighborhood were ill at that time. The coming of long-desired rains gave impetus to the federal projects for erosion control.
Within the few weeks since the program was begun in our county, 299,986 acres have been plowed or listed on these contour lines with the intention of lessening erosion. We have had 2 most welcome rains in June, but the helpful effects of the rains were largely destroyed by the drifting soil from abandoned, unworked lands around us.
It fills the furrows where the tender shoots are just coming to the surface, only to be buried by the suffocating silt of land and fields owned by rugged individualists who persist in their right to do nothing. We long for our garden and little chickens, the trees and birds and wildflowers of the years gone by. Perhaps, if we do our part, these good things will return someday. For others, if not for ourselves. March 8, 1936. Dear Evelyn, since I wrote to you, we have had several bad days. On the worst one recently, old sheets stretched across door and window openings and sprayed with kerosene quickly turned black and helped a little to keep down the irritating dust in our living rooms. Nothing that you read or see or hear will likely to exaggerate the physical discomfort and the material losses due to these storms. The confusion of mind resulting from the overthrow of all plans for improvement or normal farm work, and the difficulty in making other plans has added to our stress. To give just one specific example, the paint on our buildings has been literally scoured by the storms. We know we must save the surface, but who knows when it will be safe to encounter such a project. The pleasantest of mornings can become a prelude to an afternoon when all the dust devils unite in one hideous onslaught. Fresh paint combined with a real dust storm is not pleasing to contemplate. The resulting despair may be illustrated by an incident of the past week. The attempt by former neighbors to sell the pipe to the well on their now deserted homestead.
The virtual destruction of a well of our excellent, life-nourishing water comes close to being the unpardonable sin against future generations. The same disintegrating tendency is shown in a larger and more alarming way by the extent to which land, once owned and occupied by farm families, is now passing into ownership of banks, mortgage companies, assurance societies, and investment partnerships or corporations.
The legal notices published in our county paper this past week included 2 notices of foreclosure and 9 notices of sheriff's sales. These 11 legal actions involved the ownership of 3,520 acres of land. This remote control stands in the way of constructive efforts toward recovery. Dear neighbor, soon after my last letter, Will experienced a painful accident, bruising one ankle severely. This was at a time when the dust storms were at their worst. For a while, it seemed we could not go on. There were many days where I could not see from one farm building to the other through the choking, blinding dust clouds. Dust was piling up everywhere. The mere matter of getting milk or even water to the house in a condition fit to use proved difficult. Will did his best to direct and take part in the outdoor work, actually crawling on hands and knees the length of the barn loft to break open bales of Colorado alfalfa and get them ready for me to drop into the mangers. The wind and dust has continued with little abatement through March and April and the beginning of May. A few families have removed from our neighborhood during the spring and summer, but those that have held out through the storms are still here, working toward their individual hopes for the future. There is no constraint and little agreement as to the best methods to pursue to achieve recovery. The planners, however, might be divided into 2 large groups. Those who would rely on improved cultivation and those who believe in the possibilities of extensive irrigation by pumping from deep wells. Each irrigationist has his own pet plan, but the obstacle for all of them is the initial expense for the deep wells and an effective pumping system. Others wonder if our apparently unfailing supply of deep groundwater can take the drain of continuous pumping. Here again, we come up against the hard fact that all natural resources come to an end unless constantly replenished. Letters from the Dust Bowl, Atlantic Monthly, May 1936. Naturally, you will wonder why we stay where conditions are so disheartening. Why not pick up and move like so many others have? That's a fair question, but a hard one to answer. To leave voluntarily, to break all these closely knit ties for the sake of possibly greater comfort elsewhere, seems like defaulting on our task. We may have to leave. We can't stay here indefinitely with no return from the land, no means of income, no matter how small. But I think I shall never go willingly, or without pain that, as yet, seems unendurable. On the whole, it is not surprising that here and there some bitterness would have been felt and expressed, perhaps immoderately, over the recent Agricultural Adjustment Act decision in the Supreme Court. The benefit payments under AAA and the wage payments from federal work projects are all that saved a large territory here from abandonment. An area equal to that of all the New England states, with New Jersey and Maryland and about half of Delaware added for good measure. Farmers are not asking for special favors. We ask only an even chance as compared with other workers. On our bleak Easter morning, a jackrabbit crouched in the kindling pile next to the kitchen door. He was, however, not the frolicsome Easter bunny, but a starved, trembling creature with one eye battered out from the terrific dust storms of the preceding week. He didn't try to escape. I bathed his eye and put him into shelter with our guinea pig, hoping he would live until the showers brought some tinge of green to our dust-covered wasteland. When these wild creatures, ordinarily so able to take care of themselves, come seeking protection, their necessity indicates a cruel crisis for man and beast. After another dry summer in 1936, light rains late in September was hardly sufficient to encourage the sowing of wheat for the possibility of spring pasturage. We are now reluctantly feeding the last of our crop of 1931. High winds and consequent dust storms began early this year and still continue. While perhaps no more violent than storms of the past, their effects, being cumulative, seem more disastrous and overwhelming. The stripping of the humus from the topsoil is one of the most disastrous losses during these critical years. Verily, we are losing the cream of our land.
From 1938 to 1940, the region continued to experience dust storms, but the return of moisture over the next 3 years eventually allowed some stabilization of farming in the region. The return of agricultural prices with the Second World War further stabilized the Henderson family economy and virtually assured their relative well-being. But Caroline continued to fear the loss of her dream. She was never able to live in comfort again, and in fact, the return of dust storms in the 1950s gave credence to her fears. She lived increasingly reflecting her concerns about those conditions and about the end of her life and her health for her and her husband, Will.
May 8th, 1952. Dear Eleanor, every day seems to bring some new sorrow. In these last years of fruitless effort and disappointment. Now, one of my small group of cats has gone. This time, the very handsome corn-striped Persian. He meant the world to me. And all the small creatures that have become so much a part of my life. It seems hard to go on without them. I think we shall have to give the larkspurs the prize for perseverance. Most of the other blossoms have withered. They are still opening new and smaller single blooms at the top of their stalks. Perhaps a lesson for us to keep doing what little we can. I still cling to my bright, bright little flowers, cosmos, zinnias, asters, morning glories, and of late, a small patch of portulakas, and also the patches of native grass that came up so surprisingly after the rain. March 26, 1957. Dear Eleanor, we are so stunned and bewildered by the blizzard conditions of recent days and the realization that the worst is yet to come. But I don't know if I can write anything intelligible. The storm I mentioned Friday continued on until nearly noon on Monday. Dad put out food for the cattle once, but never made it to the hen house. Between the house and the hen house is a small white mountain that rises above the REA wires and extends into the pastures nearly 30 to 40 rods, I'd say. Cattle are all over the country, crossing the covered fences as if they weren't there. June 20th, 1957. Dear Eleanor, a pang to see the old horse collars hanging in the stables. As here at home, I have begged Dad to burn them up, but he doesn't do it. Every such thing hurts me so now, and I miss unspeakably the earlier days while we still had hope and forward-thinking thoughts. The brave little flowers bring some comfort. The first morning glories yesterday, a deep, lovely purple. Today is bringing out the first of the cosmos from volunteer plants, a dark, beautiful rose color. Dad brought home from the pasture a wild verbena and set it here by the south gate. I hope it will take root and go on blooming. I always admired the vivid purple color a little different from those in your area. September 8th, 1959. Dear Eleanor, I often think of a remark in some of Mr. Devoto's writings. He spoke of the character required at the end of a long life when there's no chance to redeem one's mistakes, and one realizes too late the utter failure of all he has hoped and striven for. The sturdy tenacity of purpose needed to keep on trying anyway, in the face of inevitable failure, compounded with each day's lost efforts. I very fear I don't have that much character or perseverance. Yesterday was a bitter day for me. I remembered early that on September of 1891, Mother and I rose extra early and made the long, slow 15-mile drive to Lamar's in time for me to enter the high school there. I can realize better now how much they sacrificed to give me the chance for an education and a broader life than would have been possible on the farm of that period. And so it is painfully humiliating to realize how little use I made of it. And now there are no fragments worth picking up. May 11th, 1965. Dear Eleanor, I'm sorry to be so helpless and can hardly make anyone understand how bad things in general have become. We are both failing fast and may not be able to keep up much longer even the pretense of taking care of ourselves, but still trying. Father seems worse because of his practically total deafness, so that I can no longer discuss anything with him and have to let them drift. The yellow roses, what few are left, are now a mass of fragrant bloom, very large and full. December 12th, 1965. Dear Eleanor, again I must try the impossible task of writing. The letter of Friday quickly became out of date, and I was ashamed of its bitterness, so I burned it up. I have had no chance for a face-to-face agreement regarding the payment for the caretaking work here in the present crisis. But I think you know we aim to be fair and reasonable. The payment of Lee's own terms will be for taking responsibility and for dependability about watering plants, care of gas, electric, and wood-burning fires, forehead of cattle, and always our dearly beloved dog, Jack. If Lee will pet him a little at the start, I think Jack will respond. P.S. I feel as if I must remind you that the only thing that caused me to consent to this search for renewed health was your firm agreement that there will be no operating. And I believe the nitrogen injections would be as bad.
Dear friends, it has taken me a long time to bring myself to write this letter, especially to my parents' old friends, and break to them the sorrowful news that Caroline and Will Henderson have both passed away in 1966. When I was in Oklahoma in September 1965, things seemed about as usual. My mother, more frail and complaining of some abdominal pain, but going about her work as usual. We all tried to get her to go to the doctor while I was there, but she refused. Later, she became worse, consulted the doctor, who diagnosed an abdominal tumor. Strongly advised that she come and live with me. September 15th, they abandoned their home and came by train, expecting to be gone only a short time. However, she was then so frail and so confused, I saw they could not make it on their own in Oklahoma. So we kept them here throughout the winter. She apparently had a very large tumor of the spleen. Felt inadvisable for her to be operated on. My father felt fine, very alert. Got to go on several trips, and then it was probably the best time that we've had together in a long time. Mother, though, failed completely, both physically and mentally, and very rapidly. In March, I took them back to Oklahoma for a brief trip, their very last trip, so they could do some business. Father finally made up his mind to permanently live with me, and I was very happy and anticipating much happiness and pleasure here with me. He rode off without a backward glance to me. 3 days later, he passed away suddenly on March 17th from a coronary fibrosis. Mother didn't even realize he was gone. Only briefly did she understand the news, but she was deteriorating so fast. We did not think it was advisable for her to even attend the funeral, and she never remembered again that he was even gone. Finally, no longer was she able to stay at home with me and for me to be able to care for her. She passed away peacefully in a rest home on August 4th after wasting away tremendously, even though she had had very good care. For my part, I've had a rather difficult time about it here. My only comfort is the pride I have in my son and my memories of my wonderful parents. Death is not extinguishing the light. It is putting out the lamp, because the dawn has indeed come. Best wishes to you for a happy new year as we join together in memories of those wonderful people that have gone before.
As she approached the end of her life, Caroline Henderson's evaluation of her achievements was pessimistic, even harsh. Some of her regrets may be discounted as the measure of the frustration she encountered farming on an unforgiving land. Even more might be attributed to age and declining health. In fact, the Great Plains and the changing nature of the national economy proved hostile to the Jeffersonian vision that had motivated her. At times, the conditions she faced seemed to mock her aspirations as well as her dreams, adding to her doubts about her values, education, and the work of a lifetime. But to stop with that analysis would require ignoring the continuing significance of her writing, as well as the importance of the resources still being derived from the Great Plains, where vital communities and people persist in the pursuit of the lives they have chosen. Almost every interpreter of the Great Plains and the Dust Bowl relies upon Caroline Henderson's description of that disaster, while her analyses continue to aid understanding the event, challenging the quick solutions offered by assorted politicians and commentators of the time and even to the present. Even more important, Caroline's words from a different stage of her life reminded her readers of truths that surpassed the values of these contributions. She once posed a rhetorical question: is it in vain that the flowers bloom by the edge of alpine glaciers or on the Siberian meadows where no one sees their color or enjoys their fragrance? She concluded that we should be grateful for all such flowerings of the human spirit, for what they suggest of the beauty unrealized of even fairer flowers growing abundantly on the higher uplands of the individual life. Those are the words, along with those in the following poem, that I would use to evaluate the significance of Caroline Henderson's life. The last person lived there 35 years past, where the barn roof is 3/4 gone and folding. The house, once the finest for miles, now stands empty, forlorn, bereft of family and dreams. They told her too many times hollyhocks and such did not belong there, but her brave flowers endured as long as she did, while the lilac she brought from her Iowa home untended now 3 decades and more flowers each spring, drawing on roots deep in the land she loved.